I'd like to welcome you to this discussion. What we are going to, three of our colleagues, we're going to discuss this issue of what's going to emerge out of this geopolitical churn that we are seeing around the world. I'm saying on one hand, we're looking at things like Brexit, the whole European Union, sort of the tensions within the European Union and the tensions which relate to the rise of the right-wing forces in certain parts of the European Union, Britain leaving the European Union. Then we have our own issues with regard to Kashmir, Pakistan. Then there is Iran and the United States coming very, very close to a real conflict. And then we have the ongoing China-US situation, which has now morphed from a trade war into really a full-fledged US containment of China, an effort by the United States to ensure that Chinese technology growth, Chinese economic growth is constrained. So what is going to come out of this churn? Where do we go? What is our position? For that, we have three outstanding speakers. I think all of them are very familiar to you. There's Dr. Sanjay Baru, who was the media advisor to the Prime Minister, but better known as far as people in the academic fraternity as an economist and as a journalist. Then we have Ambassador Singh, who has been ambassador in Iran and other places. And we have lastly Ambassador Vivek Katju, who's been ambassador of Afghanistan. What we're going to do is, what I propose is that we take about 10 minutes each, the three speakers, and then we have a short discussion. And my intention is to close this by 8 o'clock. Not going to go beyond that. So if you have questions, I suggest you write them up, make them short and crisp, because there's not going to be too much time otherwise. So I think what we'll do is that we'll start with Ambassador Katju, and then we'll work our way from the right to the left.
Thank you, Manoj, and it's a pleasure being on this panel with old colleagues. I'll be confining myself to 10 minutes. I believe that the geopolitical churn that we are seeing in the world today is, among other factors, being decided by and propelled by technological change. We live in the digital world, which is very different from the analog world which we used to inhabit. The three people on this table used to inhabit for most of our working lives. And we are now in the fourth industrial revolution, and all this is impacting in a very decisive way, bringing about enormous and rapid change, a change which is unprecedented, and that is impacting also, among other factors, on geopolitics. The balance of power is shifting and shifting quite rapidly. In some ways it is still holding firm. And cutting-edge technologies, the acquisition of cutting-edge technologies, the possession of these technologies is also impacting on geopolitical change. This is not something unique, because I do believe that technology has always been one of the determinants of geopolitical change, and we know for a fact all through history that the possession of superior technology has provided groups and societies with greater power than those who did not possess these technologies. In our own history, we've suffered colonialism. In 1750, we had 25% of the world's GDP. By 1850, when we lost out in the Industrial Revolution, it fell down to what, 3 or 4%? So that is.
I would start with 89 to 91, the collapse of Soviet Union. That's when 4 decades of non-alignment made then India rethink, made most non-aligned countries rethink, how do you deal with a unipolar world? Fukuyama, in fact, said history is over, etc. It wasn't over. History is never over. It just takes a pause. But that was a defining moment. And that's when we got an accidental Prime Minister, Narasimha Rao, who really adjusted India with an outstanding Foreign Secretary, G.N. Dikshit, to that new world. So much of what you see today, whatever a current Prime Minister or the previous Prime Ministers may have said, is nothing new. What was look east for Narasimha Rao is act east now. And what was reaching out to America then is a further reaching out to them. So, essentially the themes all were introduced at that stage, dealing with a unipolar world after the collapse of Soviet Union. But this went on till 2001. And that is where comes the next defining moment, because we were always facing terror coming out of Pakistan, but there was no one who was willing to listen to India. We kept complaining about Pakistan. Taliban rose, 96, they captured Kabul. They continued with their vision. A plane was hijacked. We were embarrassed in 99. So all this was going on, but we didn't have a shoulder to cry on, till they went and attacked America in 2001. And that sucked America into the region where it still is. So now we are dealing with that world. America comes in, but what they did, what Bush did was, coming into Afghanistan was fine, but they did not ensure that they finished off Al-Qaeda and finished off Taliban, which fled into Pakistan. So they thought, mission over. And then they went across to Iraq, which is the next defining point, which is 2003. And that's a mistake which they made, because Saddam Hussein, with all his deficiencies and all the flaws in his character, was a Sunni wall which was containing Iran, which was containing this huge Shia power, which could not go west. But once Saddam was gone, then you opened the front lines, and that's where Iran has spread. Shia majority country in Iraq, Shia minority in Syria. They're trying to overthrow it. The Sunni majority wanted to overthrow them, and you got Hezbollah in Lebanon. So you have a Shia crescent, which is the old footprint of Iran. From the Achaemenid Empire, 5th century BC, it's a natural footprint for Iran.
The way I look at the world is that historically, nations with the greatest economic power, by which we mean not simply financial power, but technological power, and Mr. Katju emphasized the importance of technology and changes in technology, are able to acquire military power as a consequence of their fiscal and financial and technological power, become military powers, and are therefore able to assert their presence in international affairs. For a long, long time, we lived in a world in which there were several such players. You had countries in Europe, you had countries in Asia, China and India themselves accounted for half of world national income till the beginning of the 18th century. In Europe, you had France, you had Britain, you had other less powerful players in Africa, or Latin America, with some local influence, not beyond their neighborhood. But the world was divided into a multiplicity of players. What the first technological revolution, the Industrial Revolution, did was to concentrate this power in Europe. As a consequence of which, imperialism originated out of Europe, and European imperialism established hegemony across the world. It was a relatively short period, 18th and 19th century. So if you look in terms of long periods of history, it's a fairly short period of time in which European economic and technological prowess established global hegemony. This was followed by the rise of the United States as a global power, and the US used both the Second World War and the First World War and the Second World War, which were essentially wars within Europe or triggered by conflicts within Europe, to emerge as the dominant technological and economic power.